In a few short months, I will turn 35. If I live to the age of 70, that means that right now I am halfway through my life. I wanted to make a video today to reflect on the things I've learned on this journey, and I do feel like I've had a pretty interesting journey so far. It has definitely not been an easy one by any means, but interesting for sure. And there's a few lessons that I have learned the hard way that I want to unpack in this video with you, because if you are in your 20s or even in your 30s, you've likely still got a lot of things to learn. You're in the process of learning. And rather than doing things the hard way, the beauty of living in the information age is that we can lean on each other's advice. We can learn from each other's mistakes. I've made a few notes and I'm going to go through them in this video, and hopefully by the end of it, you're going to have saved yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle and a lot of anxiety and regret. And you'll be further along on your journey of life than you would have otherwise been before watching this video. So stick around and let's get started on the first lesson. So the first lesson that I have pulled from my 20s was that when I was in my 20s, I spent an awful lot of time focused on the outside. I was focused on other people. I was focused on exotic destinations. I was focused on careers. I was focused on money. I was focused on a lot of things that were outside of me. And that meant that I was quite easily influenced, and not necessarily always in a good way. I think this is really a massive problem, especially for the younger generation in this age, is that there is so much discontent. There are so many people asking, what is the point? What am I here for? What is the purpose of all this? And I think even going back a couple of generations, your purpose was pretty well defined. If you grew up on a farm, you were going to be a farmer, and there was not really any alternatives, and you come to accept that. If your dad was a doctor, then you were probably going to follow in his footsteps. I think for even a couple of generations ago, there was a lot less choice, and it made making decisions a lot easier. Whereas today we have so much choice available to us, and so we look to the world for answers. We look to the world for guidance. And the problem with anyone else's advice, with anyone else's guidance, even the advice of people that love and care for you, is that their advice comes from their own experience, and it is filtered through their own fears. And that's something I've experienced even when starting this channel. I remember telling people what I wanted to do, and everybody told me, you shouldn't do it. There's lots of people trying to run YouTube channels. There's lots of people. It's an oversaturated market. And yet now, when the channel's starting to grow and I'm having some level of success, people are saying, well, we always believed in you. We always knew you could do it. And so the issue with looking for guidance from the outside world is that guidance may be misdirected and isn't necessarily in your own unique interests. So what I would suggest, or what I wish I had done in my 20s, was spent more time getting to know who I am as a person. I used to believe that I was like clay. I was totally moldable, that I came into this world with a blank slate and that I could be and do anything that I wanted to. And while there is a part of that is true, it is also very true that there are certain traits that are born into us, that are in our genetics. And so just because I can do something doesn't necessarily mean that I want to do something. So what I wish I'd spent my 20s doing was getting to know who I am and my interests and what lights me up and the way that I want to see the world, rather than trying to absorb all of the opinions and fears and hopes and dreams of other people. The process of your 20s is an exciting one for sure, but you're also open to a lot of misguidance. And you see that a lot with certain people. Andrew Tate is a prime example of that. There's a lot of guys that are in their 20s that just feel like they have no idea where to turn, what their purpose is. And so when they see someone that seems so successful and seems to have the answers for them, they lap it up. And it's not who they are as people. By all means, take the advice of other people, but run it through the filter of you. Ask yourself how this advice applies to you and whether this advice is useful to you or not, or whether there are parts of the advice that you want to take away and not accept it as whole truth. So my first piece of advice, I would say, is to stop looking outside as much and start looking in. Get to know yourself, get to know your strengths and your weaknesses. There's another thing about strengths and weaknesses. I'm naturally a people person, which is why I always did well in sales. I have a natural flair for it and an interest in people and a deep sense of empathy. I feel like when I have a conversation with someone, I can get into their head and feel what they're feeling. And that made me very good as a salesperson. And I've had a few calls with people lately that want to get into sales, and they only want to get into sales because of the money that's involved, the money that you can make from a career in sales. But the problem is that they don't have the same level of interest in people. They're not as focused on other people. And because of that, they are going to struggle in a career like sales, in the same way that I would struggle in a career like, I don't know, programming, computer programming or code writing or something like that, because it's not how my brain works. So learning your strengths and weaknesses, learning about yourself, and then picking a path based on those strengths and weaknesses, I think is a very sensible thing to do and is going to set you up for success in the best way possible. Just because your friend is making £100,000 a year coding does not necessarily mean that you're going to have the same level of success. And if you do, you may make more sacrifices than he had to make to get there, because you are not the same person as him. So spend more time getting to know who you are, because as much as you're young and you are moldable to a certain extent, you are also half defined as a person. You do already have traits and strengths and weaknesses, and you should learn them and you should play to them. So that's my first piece of advice. Second would be to look after your body. Now, I spent a lot of my 20s, I grew up above a pub. My dad was a landlord of a pub, and he used to run nightclubs as well. And so I had a pretty liberal, open relationship with alcohol. I would never say I was an alcoholic, but I was certainly a binge drinker. And I used to smoke, and I may or may not have also dabbled in other things that are not strictly legal. And as much as I have always had a focus on my health, I've always tried to be active and to go to the gym, and I love being outdoors and hiking. I wonder how much easier it would have been, or how much fitter I would be now if I had had more of a focus on my body. Because let me tell you this, your body is a machine, and that machine is designed to take you through this world and to navigate and to help you defend from viruses and whatever else that might come at you. And if you want to thrive in this world, if you want success in any area, you need to set yourself up for success. You can't avoid the stresses and strains of life. You can't avoid shit things happening, but you can prepare yourself as best as you can. And you're looking after your body is one of the best ways of doing that. Making sure you get enough sleep, exercising, eating right, not eating processed foods. I've talked about this in videos before. We don't need to necessarily overcomplicate it, but looking after your body is vital. Imagine you're in a scenario at work and something really shitty happens. Maybe you think that you're going to get fired. You've had a lapse week at work and you think you're going to get fired, and you get called into the boss's office. Who's going to deal with this better? The guy that was out drinking the night before, that smokes constantly, that gets terrible night's sleep, that eats crap food, that doesn't look after himself? Or the guy that's had a really decent night's sleep, woken up, had a decent breakfast and feels strong? It's the same situation, but you can guess that the second person is going to have a much better chance of dealing with that situation. The situation doesn't change. That person A and person B can't change what is happening, but they certainly can change their preparedness for the situation. So looking after your body is so important. And you know, there's so many memes of like guys when they get into their 30s, when they get up and going, oh, and it's so true. Like, you do tend to get into your 30s, and that is when the abuses and the strains that you put on your body start to show. And I'm only 34 now, and I can only imagine you multiply that out by 10 or 20 years. I've seen it myself at work, guys that have had a pretty active lifestyle but maybe haven't looked after themselves properly, and are now in their 50s and 60s really suffering with bad hips or bad backs or knee problems or ankle problems. I see it all the time. And remember, your 20s is only for 10 years of your life, and then you've got to suffer for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 decades of your life. So looking after yourself is a small investment. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go out and enjoy a drink or experiment with things if that's what you want to do, but do it in moderation, and make sure that the majority of your time is spent looking after yourself, not abusing yourself. So look after your body, because it's the only one you've got. The third piece of advice is this, and it is, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. This is something that I have had to learn the hard way, and is particularly difficult for men. When we have this ego that we're trying to protect, it can be pretty isolating. When we're all running around trying to live up to a certain standard that we either hold ourselves to or we believe other people hold us to, it's exhausting and it's hard work. We feel exhausted all the time. I remember there was a period in my 20s where I was convinced I was an introvert, because I would get so exhausted after spending time around people. And the pattern I noticed as well, that it was worse when I spent time with lots of people versus just one. And it occurred to me when I got into my kind of early 30s that I wasn't an introvert at all, because if I spent time with the right people, and if I was able to just let go and be myself around those people, that I felt lit up. I've always been an extrovert. The problem was that I had a mask on, that I was trying to create and protect this ego, and I was trying to keep everybody happy. And so I would try to be the version of myself that I thought that person wanted in the moment. And what was interesting, the reason why I became more exhausted, the more people that were there, was because when I was only with one person, I only had to be the version of them that I thought they wanted me to be. But when I was in a group of, say, 10 people, and I was trying to be a version that I think all of them individually wanted me to be, and I was trying to please them all, that was a lot of hard work for my brain. And so what I've learned in my 30s is that being vulnerable is the portal through which we can start to really be ourselves, where we can let that ego go. Because one of two things is going to happen when you're vulnerable with someone. Either they're going to think, this guy's a pussy, like, I don't want to hang around him, he's talking about his feelings, or this person's too vulnerable for me, or this person's situation doesn't relate to me, I'm not interested in seeing them. And that's all right, because the second type of person is going to think, shit, this guy has just opened up to me and I really appreciate his vulnerability. He has been vulnerable to me, and now I'm going to do the same to him. And that vulnerability can foster this much deeper connection than you would get by two egos coming together. And what you'll find as you get older is that you have less connections with people, but those connections are far deeper. And so I wish in my 30s I had spent more time letting go of my ego and fostering these deeper connections than trying to maintain all of these loose connections, which all dropped away anyway. I wasted a lot of time in my 20s trying to keep everybody happy, and not only did I not manage to keep everyone happy, but I also managed to keep myself miserable. So be vulnerable. The next tip I have is to not be afraid to fail. And I think a part of this comes back to what I was just talking about with ego. We don't want to fail because we don't want to be seen as failures, but there is so much to be learned from failing. And believe me, it is much easier to fail in your 20s than it is in your 30s or 40s or 50s. You are in a unique position at the moment where you can afford to absorb failure. The older you get, the more responsibilities you're going to have. You're eventually probably going to have children, you're going to have a career, you're going to have rent or a mortgage and bills to pay. And it is much harder to take risks at that point in your life because you are risking the roof over your head, or you're risking the fulfillment or livelihood of your family. But you're right now in a unique position where you can fail and fail and fail and continue to do that. And as long as you fail correctly, as long as you fail and you learn, you reflect back on what worked and what didn't work, and you take those lessons into the next stages, the next steps, then there is no such thing as failure. But your appetite for risk and your ability to absorb risk are at its highest right now. And so now is the time to capitalize on that. This is one thing I felt like in my 20s I actually kind of got right. I took a lot of risks. I did a lot of things that I think my 30-year-old self would have struggled to do. I tried so many different careers. I set up a window cleaning business. I set up a sports nutrition brand. I tried loads of different things, and although I can look back on those and say that they were failures, ultimately they didn't turn out the way that I wanted them to be, I have learned so many things, so many lessons that I didn't even realize I'd learned at the time. But now in my 30s, I can draw on all of that wisdom, all of that knowledge, all of those lessons, and use it to move forward. Growing this channel, for instance, is a perfect example. That level of resilience that I learned from failing again and again. The people skills that I learned from my time in sales. My sense of empathy from my time as a carer. There are so many jobs that I've had over the years that have taught me skills that have all now started to come together and form this perfect mix of skills and talents that I need to move forward in the next stage of my life, and that is this channel. And if this channel doesn't work out, and if this channel fails, then I'll have learned something from that too, and I'll bring that into the next step. But I can't afford to take the level of risk that I did in my 20s because now I have bills to pay. So utilize your 20s very carefully. Do not let them go by in a haze. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Drop the ego. Invest in connections that are worth having. Get to know yourself and take risks. Risks in relationships, risks in business, risks in life. Because it's all worth it in the end. So I hope this video was helpful. There's just a few things there. I could probably go on all day about all of the things that I've learned in my 20s, but there's a few things that just came to my mind and I just wanted to make this video today. So I hope you found them helpful, and you can subscribe to my newsletter using the link below, and I'll catch you in the next video.